Hi, I'm Parul Jha and welcome to Coach for Excellence. So, in today's video, we are going to do another paper analysis, and I'm really excited about it. So, today we are going to talk about a paper which is about what every CEO needs to know about non market strategy. This was a very interesting paper that was written by David Bash and David Bruce Allen in MIT Sloan Management Review in 2010. And I'm doing a paper review for all of you guys today. So, in the paper, the central question is why should firms actively manage social, political, and regulatory environment as part of the corporate strategy? So, if you look at it, competitive advantage is no longer generated solely through products, technology, and market positioning these days, right? Firms increasingly gain advantage by shaping the regulation, the public policy, the social legitimacy, and the institutional environments. So now the key question is, do firms compete only within markets or do they increasingly compete to shape the markets themselves? So the paper really touches upon why it is very, very essential to have a non-market strategy, and every CEO needs to know certain frameworks and why it's important. And also, in the paper, there are a lot of examples they've given of various companies that have used the non-market strategy to their advantage, and that is how they've also built their competitive advantage within the market that they are operating. So, with that thought and that central question, let's look at the corporate strategy premise. So, why businesses need to be social and political and not just economic agents? Because you have to move beyond usual markets. The competitive advantage, as we mentioned the previous slide, is no longer restricted to market environments. There is also a need to proactively shape the operating environment rather than reacting to constraints. You have to manage the stakeholders, which is engage the political environment to mitigate risks from activists and regulators. You need to have an integrated action and you need to have the license to operate, right? So we're also going to do a Novartis case discussion where I'm going to talk about how Novartis navigates the complex economic and political landscapes in India. And this is a very interesting part of the paper, which I wanted to highlight with you all today. Now, moving on, why has this strategic shift happened that we moved from traditional strategy to non market strategy? And let's just spend like a minute on this slide. So, if you look at the traditional strategic thinking that most of the firms had, firms compete primarily through products, services, and operational efficiency. Management attention always was focused on customers, competitors, suppliers, and shareholders. Now, strategy was concerned with positioning within existing market structure, and it was always thought that the competitive advantage will come from innovation, differentiation, and cost leadership. External social and political forces were treated as constraints or compliance requirements, and government affairs, CSR, and public relations were often separate support functions. Now, when we talk about the emerging strategic reality, what's really happened is that firms are competing both through market capabilities and institutional influence. So, management attention increasingly has to extend to regulators, NGOs, activists, medias, and governments. And strategy increasingly now involves shaping the environment in which the markets are operating, right? Just not thinking about the market that you're working in, but you're also pretty much shaping the environment in which the markets you are intending to operate in. Now, competitive advantage in this emerging strategic reality comes from legitimacy, policy influence, and stakeholder alignment. And there's also social and political forces which are viewed as opportunities for strategic intervention. And market and non market activities have to be integrated into a unified strategy. So that's the strategic shift that the paper talks about, that you have to move away from the traditional strategy to a more non market strategy for companies to really excel and have a competitive advantage. Now, navigating the non-market environment of business understands, you have to understand the forces which are shaping the internal rules of market competition and value creation. So if we look at, you know, uh, when it's pure market strategy, your key actors are suppliers, customers, competitors, your primary currency is the money. And the main objective is profit and market share. But when you talk about a non-market environment, then the key actors could be government, NGOs, media, regulators, and your primary currency will then move on to information. And the objective would be more like legitimacy and environment shaping. So some companies have really got that right and are moving towards having a very strong non-marketing strategy. But how do they do that? So the paper talks about IA3 framework. And the IA3 framework provides a very structured approach for analyzing and managing the non-market issues by systematically examining the issue, which is, and we're going to talk a little more about each of these, the actors, the interests, the arena, information, and assets, which are involved in a social or political challenge that the firm might be facing. Now, once you have the structure in place, it really helps organizations move from a reactive problem solving to a proactive strategic influence, much like Porter's five forces helps analyze competitor markets. So here, the organization might want to use this framework to understand the issue at hand, which is like identifying the issue affecting the company's ability to create or appropriate value. The assets could be the reputation, trustworthiness, and network of contacts required to prevail. Information, which I said is the currency in the non-market environment, the currency moving the issue. Superior data on policy alternatives, they provide an advantage to the company. Actors could be, you have to identify the actors with an economic or ideological stake in the issue. Depending on the issue, you'll have to identify the actors. Interest is understanding what actors want and what motivates them to map allies and adversaries. So this kind of an internal approach to this framework has to be properly sorted out. You need to have a team to work and really work out a non-market strategy or the non-market environment that you're in, and then pick up the issue, pick up the actors, the assets, the interest, the information, and the arena, the setting where the actors will meet, from regulatory proceedings to the public biosphere. So once companies are able to understand this framework and really understand the non-market issues that they are facing and how they have to systematically address them, then it helps them really move from the reactive problem solving to a proactive strategic influence uh, in, in operating in competitive environments. So now the much talked about Novartis case in this paper is the Novartis faced a major challenge when the Indian government denied a patent for its cancer drug, Glivec, threatening its patent-based business model and future revenues in India. So really, instead of relying only on legal action, Novartis pursued a broad non-market strategy by engaging policymakers, influencing public opinion, and highlighting the importance of intellectual property protection. So this was a very smart move by Novartis, because simultaneously the company strengthened its social legitimacy by providing Glivec at reduced prices and expanding access to medicine programs for millions of patients. So if they only had a market strategy wherein they were only focused on product, the market, and all of that, they would have been a major failure. But since they also had a parallel non-market strategy, which was extremely strong, it has benefited the company in a lot of ways. So let's break it down, right? So we understand it was a Glivec battle where Novartis fought for India patent, but there was a patent denial because India cited lack of improved efficacy for the newer version of the medicine that had come. Now, Novartis holds more than, like patents in 40 plus nations, but the Indian environment kind of is where they faced high levels of social activism. So then they started, building a public strategy. They used web testimonials to shape the views. They used R&D production. They defended the R&D heavy business model, and they also had to battle against the Indian government to protect their corporate image. So if we dwell deeper into the strategic integration of philanthropy and property, what was the strategic intent? The strategic intent for Glivec patent litigation was defending their R&D business model because they had a patent in 40 plus countries. So what they did was they provided access to medicine. So here their strategic intent was really to undermine the social critics. This was a strategy to basically address the social critics, and 80 million plus patients were reached through this access to medicines program that they started. Then there were also free leprosy and TB drugs, which was against to win the political goodwill, millions of free doses, at cost malaria treatment, which was to shape global health policy, and tens of millions were reached. So if you look at how Novartis approached the entire Indian market for its cancer drug Glivec, was they had a very strong non-market strategy. Another example that the paper talks about is Toyota. And here what they're talking about is how they stretch the field, how non-market positioning creates tangible market differentiation. So what Toyota basically did was it provided an HOV lane access. Toyota successfully lobbied California to allow Prius hybrids access to HOV lanes with single occupants. So it was a minimal cost because this non-market victory cost the state almost nothing, but provided massive incentives for urban buyers. It also had an urban appeal because provided a massive incentive for urban professionals to choose the Prius over the other competitors that were there. And the group support, part of Toyota was that it successfully reinforced by support from environmental groups, creating a win-win for legislators and Toyota. The resale value, the second-hand Priuses with HOV stickers sold up to $4,000 more than newer models without them. So that was the kind of, that premium that they could command because of this HOV lane access that they had provided. The brand fit strategy aligned with brand values as an environmentally conscious innovator. So this is how Toyota kind of stretched the field by really looking at tangible market differentiation in their non-market positioning. Now, Vodafone is another example mentioned in the paper where there was a preemptive response to European roaming charge caps that secured an early competitive advantage for Vodafone. So Vodafone provided something called as a Vodafone Passport. So it launched an innovative opt-in program for travelers to argue binding regulation was unnecessary as the market provided its own solutions. So why did they do that? They combined the product innovation with targeted lobbying to shrink regulatory impact, allowing the firm to own rules before they were finalized. So this was kind of a preemptive response to European roaming charge caps that also helped them gain a competitive advantage. So broadly, if we look at the comparative analysis of the diverging rules, currencies, and success factors in each arena of non-market versus market analysis, if you look at it, the primary currency in market environment is money. In the non-market environment, it's more information. The goal in a market environment would be to have the leadership, the market share within a category or within a specific product that you are operating in the market. Whereas in a non-market environment, it will be more about coalitions, legitimacy. The response would obviously be flexibility and speed. But in the non-market environment, your response has to be being consistent, having a commitment towards the non-market strategy that you're going after. Here, market environment, there's predictability, but the non-market environment, there's always uncertainty. So that's the nature of the environment that you'll have to plan for. And the core driver for a market environment would be a value creation, but for a non-market environment, it would be values and ethics. So this is how companies have to have a very integrated market and non-market kind of a strategy to really carve out a good competitive advantage in the markets that they are operating in these days. So moving on, the paper kind of talks about what is the global imperative which is driving the non-market strategy. So there are 4 factors of globalization that have elevated the importance of managing beyond the market. And those are, first, you have multiple audiences. So you have to navigate the audiences with conflicting social and political values. Competitive advantage or competitive edge would be of utmost importance, right? The firms are trying to seek differentiation through political and social positioning rather than only a market positioning. And there are also new regulatory hurdles that companies face. So as industries open, governments create very complex and non-uniform agencies. So to navigate those, you need to have a strong non-market strategy and globalization of NGOs. So activists leverage news and internet to challenge company plans globally. So with this new, these factors, they really have elevated the importance of managing beyond the market for most of the companies that are trying to operate. So finally, I would like to conclude today's discussion by really pointing out the key takeaways. So the central challenge for modern executives or CEOs is no longer simply how to compete within markets, right? But how to simultaneously manage and influence the non-market environment that shapes those markets that they're trying to, operate and excel at. So I want to leave you all with this core question. So has the role of the CEO evolved from being a market strategist to becoming an institutional strategist? And I hope this is a thought-provoking question for anyone watching the video today. I enjoyed sharing my insights of what I learned from the paper. I hope you enjoyed too. I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.